So welcome. I know, Scott, we've been trying to make this happen, right, for quite a few months. So really excited that we're getting to do this now, and welcome.
Yeah, the stars have finally aligned. So
yeah, exactly. So maybe if what you can do is just maybe start by telling us, who you are and what you do and who you work for.
Yes. Thanks so much for having me, and really excited to talk today. So my name is Scott Kelly. I'm the product lead over AI and automation at NetDocuments, one of the largest document management systems and content management system for legal professionals across the world. Before that, I ran a startup, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about today, called Afterpattern, which did kind of legal process automation. And before that, I was a lawyer. I was actually a civil rights attorney at the ACLU of Pennsylvania for a couple of years before shifting over to technology.
Cool. I saw you did a BA at Yale, and then kind of went across to law after that. Did you always want to study law, or were you in the very, very beginning, back in Yale days, what were you aiming to be back then?
Yeah, that's a great question. Man, if I could rewind to then, what was I thinking then? I don't think I was thinking about a lot in terms of planning out my future. I think law is sort of one of those worlds where some people really choose it, and then some people kind of stumble into it in the same way they do like consulting or finance or something like that. And unfortunately, I think I was, sort of the latter category. I didn't really think a lot about what I wanted to do next, and so I thought, might as well get a law degree. It seems like, the legal system is important. There's important things you can do with that knowledge, and it turned out to be actually a great thing for me. I ended up really enjoying learning about the law. I enjoyed the kind of doors it opened to me in terms of getting into public interest law, and obviously really enjoy what I'm doing today with legal tech. So I'm glad that college, Scott, didn't have a plan, but that's how I ended up in law.
Yeah. I'm definitely a stumbler as well. I went from a sailor to law, which is kind of a pretty weird juncture. But happy to be here too. I mean, I'm also interested, like, obviously to kind of, going to that public interest into legal tech. When did it happen in terms of, the desire to, stop practicing law and kind of focus on that technology side? Tell us about when was that, and what was that light bulb moment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it happened pretty organically, to be honest. I mean, what originally drew me to public interest law was that you could go out and, find a law that you wanted to change, and then you could essentially construct a case to challenge that law. And the impact of that case would not just be, getting a good resolution for whoever you were representing, but it would also be affecting a much broader change in a particular state, or even at the federal level. I was at a state syndicate of the ACLU, so we were focused on state level impact. And so after doing that for a time, I think, I was always sort of interested in technology. Like at nights, I would sometimes like come up with business plans for like silly ideas around tech. And I just found myself really drawn to that. I think what I realized over time was technology was almost an even more powerful form of what I was doing at the ACLU, in the sense that you could tackle a problem and you could do it at a scale that was sort of impossible as an individual human, right? The levers you had as a public interest attorney were like changing constitutions or changing case law, but the levers you have as a technologist are literally shipping a product that can reach, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, or in the case of our startup, millions of people.
Yeah. Maybe kind of changing the topic a little bit. What does the day in the life of Scott Kelly look like today?
Oh yeah, a little different than the startup days for sure.
Yeah,
The thing when you're at a startup, especially the size of the one that I ran, is you wear a lot of different hats.
yeah,
These days, I'm much more focused on kind of just all things product at NetDocuments, and my portfolio is AI and automation. So we're really looking at, okay, what are these emerging trends happening in the market with obviously large language models, and how can we bring that to our customers in a way that isn't just a snazzy demo, but actually like really moves the needle for their businesses. And so what I spend a lot of my time doing is working with the engineering team, working with the product managers I manage, and thinking about how are we going to build these things the right way, and how are we going to get them to market so that we're actually helping people. And I mean, it's obviously I think 2 years ago, if I had explained what I do to folks at like a dinner party or
yeah,
something, and they're like, "Oh, document management for lawyers,"
yeah,
they'd be like, "Well, that's interesting, but like not terribly exciting." But nowadays, I think everybody realizes that there's such opportunity with big data sets. With the emerging capabilities of large language models. And so it's really an exciting time to be at a company like NetDocuments working on the problems we're working on. And I think just being a legal professional in general, we're kind of at the bleeding edge of the changes that are happening across the kind of knowledge worker economy. So
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I'm always intrigued, kind of obviously with Afterpattern and kind of joining NetDocs, kind of the two the two different almost roles from founder to kind of part of a wider company. But probably just a quick question on the product side. You know, how tough has it been to almost I don't know if you're doing this, but reverse engineering some of the new kind of upcoming functionality around Gen AI and kind of and the difference between probably the more traditional AI models where your training models, it's machine-based learning, etc.
yeah.
How hard is it to kind of bring that to a product that is really well established in the market? It's kind of for some it's quite a legacy product versus blank sheet of canvas, new tool, dream it up, off you go. Like it's almost like you've become an engine or product manager for Harley Davidson or Ducati or something. Because I mean, obviously NetDocs has been around for quite a long time, right? Like it's got a deep history. So what are the two different challenges that you see, or what are the differences that you see between the two?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I mean, at NetDocuments, if you look at our history around AI, it was always something that we were very interested in and that we had spent significant resources on. But what we'd seen in the past with the sort of prior state-of-the-art models was that the outcomes we were able to achieve for our users was not great. And so we never really we rolled out a couple pieces of functionality, but on a limited release to a few customers. And then we realized in testing, it just wasn't delivering the value we wanted. So a really classic use case was a while ago, we rolled out a feature that would help with kind of like understanding the contents of the document, like basically
Yeah,
what's the metadata in there automatically, right? And that was
yeah,
sort of the holy grail for a lot of document management systems. And so I think about 4 or 5 years ago, we rolled something out to one of our customers, and it just wasn't accurate enough. And when it was accurate, it would require tons and tons of training data for that
yeah,
particular type of document that they wanted.
yeah.
And we just didn't see all of our customers being willing to provide us with 10,000 examples of each of the type of documents they might want to have metadata from.
Yeah,
So while we were very interested in AI, in some ways we were actually very new to it as a platform in the sense that we had no established, generally available AI products other than our automated filing for email. And so when the kind of new breed of foundational models started to come into maturity, right? Like they kicked off in 2017, but they really came into maturity in around like 2021 was the
yeah,
start of
yeah,
it, right?
yeah,
And we started to do some testing around that. we realized there was this huge opportunity space for our platform because we didn't have established products in these different categories. And we knew that this was a need that our customers wanted. And finally, we had a technology that could meet that need. I remember one of the first things we tested was actually that kind of like automated metadata. We like gave it the first 3 pages of a document, and we said, okay, guess at what the profile of this document should be. What should the metadata be? And the results we were seeing were so much better than that other piece of functionality we'd worked on for 2 years and had a whole team running at. And it was just night and day. And so for us, that was a real aha moment, that this is a very real technology and it's only going to get better. And so we need to make sure that this is built into a lot of what we're doing at NetDocuments. And I think we proved over the last 2 years that we were very serious about that commitment.
Yeah, cool. No, I think it's exciting times. I feel like we're kind of a little bit on this pinnacle of the AI not just kind of spitting out data or populating a system, actually on the verge of this AI almost taking action and making decisions on what it sees, to kind of, which really should be, I think, a big game changer in terms of for contracts, for documents, for matters. So yeah, it's definitely an exciting place to be right now.
Yeah, what about exciting and a little frightening, right?
Yeah, so. Frightening and yeah. I just watched Ex Machina coming back on the plane, so yeah, I'm definitely reminded of how frightening it could be. Yeah. What about you just told me you're from Kansas originally, but moved to New York, I'm interested to kind of, in terms of people of your caliber, startup, kind of entrepreneurial. Do you have morning rituals or habits, like in terms of what you need to do to get functioning every day? Are you a creature of habit, or is every day different for you?
Yeah, I wish I was a really methodical person who had all these great rituals that I could share, but I'm really not. I think, like I said, I wasn't much of a planner in college, and even stumbling into starting a startup. It was actually born out of this. My wife was in school at Wharton in Philadelphia, and then we decided we were going to move from Pennsylvania. We're going to move to New York. And when I made that transition, that's when I, kind of met my co-founders and we started the company. Not part of the plan. Well, my days are the same way. It's not part of the plan. Like I don't really have any, great habits, I could say. I mean, generally I try to, work out and stay fit. And I try to carve out time to not have really structured things that I'm doing so that I can learn. I think that's a big thing I've realized, particularly as a product manager, is just following my curiosity and just being yeah, maybe I just watched 3 hours of YouTube videos, but YouTube is where the, AI revolution is happening in a lot of ways. Some of the best content you can find about how to actually productionize, AI is actually, influencers on YouTube, believe it or not. A lot of people think that's a joke, but it's real. So I think, not having a plan is sometimes a good thing, because you can give yourself the space to follow your curiosity.
Yeah. I know, that's good. Take us back to the time when you started Afterpattern, and maybe like you said, it was around that time of the move from Philly to New York. Great town, Philadelphia, by the way. I love that town.
I like
a lot of time for Philadelphia. But was that a planned meeting with your founders? Is it something that you've been thinking about for a while? What was the internal conversation that you had, either with yourself or with your wife, that said, right, okay, I'm figuratively jumping off this cliff and I'm going to do a startup, which, moving to a very expensive city, is very risky, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, fortunately, my wife was moving to a job where she was going to make a little bit of income. So, she was, and as a public interest lawyer, I wasn't making all that much in the first place. So from the financial risk side of things, it wasn't as big of a risk as it seemed. What I will say is that, you know, when we moved to New York, I kind of knew that I'm the kind of person who like really sticks to something once I'm doing it. And so I knew the next job I took would likely be something that I did for a very long time. And I think that gave me pause because I just wanted to, you know, the world's a big place and there's lots of things you can do in your career and your life. And I really wanted to think hard about what's that next thing I'm going to do. And I saw this really, really interesting job posting. I hesitate to even call it a job. It was a fellowship program being run by the Robin Hood Foundation, which is one of the largest nonprofits in New York. And they were basically recruiting people to come and build technology, and it could be a for-profit company or a nonprofit, to address like kind of an area of thematic concern for them. And so their thematic concern that year just happened to be access to justice, the sort of like 80 to 90% of people who show up in courts every day in the United States, at least, and aren't represented by an attorney. And what can we do to leverage technology at scale to actually help those people get to better outcomes? And so I was like, this is like a totally wild job listing. Like, what is this?
Yeah.
And they're not, and I'm not technical, but like they're looking for lawyer experts. I'm certainly not a lawyer expert, but no real lawyer expert is actually going to sign up for this because it was, you know, not a lot of funding. It was about enough for 6 months of work. And so I went into this program, and it was essentially like Y Combinator meets The Bachelor, kind of, right? So you like, they had 20 fellows in it. And we kind of, you know, some of us were designers, some of us were product managers, some of us were engineers, some of us were legal experts, in quotes. And they basically had us like run around New York, interview a bunch of law firms and courts and, you know, legal stakeholders across the kind of justice ecosystem. And then they said, okay, form up in groups, you decide the groups, and build some tech. And you know, some of you, we might write an additional check to fund you for another 6 months. And we were fortunate, I was fortunate enough to find my co-founders, some really, really great folks. And we decided, you know what, let's build this thing together. This like probably is a bad idea, but it's going to be fun. You know, we were at the time in our lives where we could afford to take that risk. And, you know, none of us had kids at the time, and it just felt like the right time for us. And so we went out and we started building.
That's an amazing story. So it's almost like an incubator mix Dragon's Den. You know, like oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, you had to pick your team. Yeah, you know, and some people ended up not really finding a team for them, but I found some folks I was really aligned with, and together we decided to build, you know, Afterpattern.
So how many people were in your team?
Yeah, so when we started, there was 4 of us in all. So it was Nico, Toma, and Michael, and myself. And then over time, sort of, you know, one of us sort of moved on after about a year. So it was then just Michael and Toma and I. And we brought on some employees over the next couple of years who really helped us as well. And, you know, we built a small but mighty no-code automation tool for legal professionals all over the world.
Amazing. And how did you almost break out of the Robin Hood mold? And then, you know, was it 1 year? You know, what was the point where you said, you know, this is a tool, let's really go for it? And did you bootstrap it yourself, or did you get that check from the Robin Hood team?
Yeah, so yeah, just to kind of like go through the timeline. So when we originally built, like started the startup, it was a totally different idea. It was in legal tech, but it was a totally different idea. It was like, the best way to put it was, we felt like a lot of people try to build legal marketplaces in the past where you connect like consumers with lawyers. And we had this idea for how to build a better one and how to avoid a lot of the mistakes that have been made with those marketplaces in the past. And we spent about 2 years building on this idea, and we actually signed up a lot of these small local legal networks, referral networks called bar associations in the United States. And at the height of that service, we were processing about maybe 500,000 requests for like legal help a year. And that service actually is still operated to this day.
Wow.
But the economics were a little challenging, as I'll say, is one thing. And we always felt like that was something that would get us to a network of lawyers that we could then enable some kind of knowledge sharing. We didn't really know exactly what it was, but we were like some sort of knowledge sharing across lawyers where they could, one expert in one area of law could build something and then another could leverage that. And we spent a lot of time trying to essentially build out this network for distribution for this product we would someday build. And then one day we kind of looked around and we're like, look, we've raised a little bit of money. So we raised kind of like a family and friends round, not a lot. And we said, like, look, we've got about a year left, honestly. And then we're like, it's not going to work. And so do we want to spend the next year continuing to kind of double down on this system we'd built? Or do we just want to build the thing we were always planning on building, even though we haven't figured out the distribution? And so we said, you know what, like, if we're going to spend all our time making like no money at all, basically, doing a thing, we might as well do it doing something that we think is big and potentially really impactful. And so we decided to build Afterpattern, which is kind of this crazy idea of like, okay, we're going to let lawyers and paralegals and just like people who aren't very, often are very busy and not interested in, software. We're going to basically turn them into software developers. We're going to let them take the expertise that they have on immigration law or bankruptcy law or whatever area of law and whatever jurisdiction they operate in and translate that into kind of their own form-based document automation that they could either use for client work or potentially even open up more broadly to the public. And so that was really the vision behind Afterpattern, and we just started to build. And I was lucky enough to be working with like a great, we had great engineers, great designer, and we were able to just build and build and build. And I think we carved out a reputation in the legal industry of being a very, very sophisticated legal automation platform that you could not just do document automation, but you could store your data, you could reuse it, you could create portals on top of it, you could run background apps, you could create intake automations. We had a lot of functionality packed into this kind of like little startup. So
that's really cool. It was weird because my next question was going to be, how has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? But actually that's kind of almost it, right? Like, not that it was a failure, because obviously it was working and being used and everything like that. But obviously, I've been reading a lot about ensuring, like, when you talk about that, your eyes lit up basically. And I was thinking, obviously that the decision was the right one because it brought you joy, like, and I think if I've always been the one that, we've only got one life, you've got to, make sure that you're having lots of fun and doing so. Well, what about the progression and purchase but by NetDocs and kind of, I guess, fast forwarding to that and then what challenges did you face in the beginning of that purchase and even the integration and how did you land on your feet now to being the product manager at NetDocs and kind of finding your way there?
Yeah, it's great question. I mean, I think, the advice, the advice I would give folks, and maybe this isn't the right advice because it's, in sample size of one, right? Is I did feel like when we were building, I would look around and I could sort of, I could always see the startups that were building to be acquired, right?
Yeah.
Like that you could see very both in terms of how they marketed, the integrations they had, and just like the rigor with which they may or may not have been shipping certain software. It's like, oh, this is kind of like a game they're playing to kind of get to this promised land. And I think we were never that way. Maybe because we weren't, serious business people or something, but we really just wanted to build something awesome that really helped folks do their work. And we found a lot of gratification that, and we felt like whatever would come next, whether that was like, another venture round, which is actually what we were about to raise a venture round before we were acquired. But another venture round or an acquisition, like that would take care of itself as long as we were building the right thing and kind of putting in the work. And so for us, we had put in the work, and I think we had carved out that reputation as a tool that was punched above its weight. I mean, we were a 5-person team at the time we were acquired. And I think most people who learned that would have been a little surprised by that, because we actually, serviced a lot of law firms at the time.
Yeah.
And so in terms of how it all came about, I mean, honestly, because we had carved out that reputation, we actually had a lot of folks coming to us and that were interested in whether it was a partnership or an acquisition. They wouldn't always say, but you kind of got the picture. We probably have like 1 or 2 inbounds per month. And honestly, we tell them all the same thing, which was we weren't really that interested. But I will say, when NetDocuments approached us, we didn't actually know a lot about them because we were a little bit smaller law, and we didn't operate kind of like at the larger law. And NetDocuments tends to be more middle market and large law, though we also have a lot of strength in the small market. But as we learned more about what NetDocuments does and the position it has in the market, we were like, wow, this kind of feels like a time machine, right? It kind of feels like we step into this and we jump forward 10 years to the scale we want to be at someday. And like, as a team that really valued like building big things and really helping people, it seems like not only would we be able to obviously make a meaningful financial impact for ourselves, obviously acquisitions, there's a financial component, but we'd also be able to do kind of work at the scale that we always dreamed of. So that seemed really, really compelling. And we decided to make the leap. And I don't think any of us regret it. I mean, it's been an incredible journey at NetDocuments.
So what has been the most challenging part of that?
Yeah, an incredible journey, but with lots of horrors along the way. No, it's actually been really positive. And like, honestly, right before we sold, I remember talking to a lot of startup founders about their acquisition journeys, and they were like kind of across the board pretty negative. And it was very much like arrest, invest, and like, I want to get out of here. Well, I mean, like, honestly, at NetDocuments, we didn't have a vesting period. We could have like technically left on day one, but none of us were going to do that. And we knew we weren't going to do that, and they knew we weren't going to do that. We were in it to build something special together. And I think like building on that trust over the last, couple of years, I think we've really, created something really incredible. And I think we just put out numbers recently, Pattern Builder Max, which is kind of like the AI augmented version of, Pattern Builder, which was based on the Afterpattern technology, is now in the hands of like 13,000 like users after launching in like at the end of October, which makes it like the fastest growing product we've had of all time by like a factor of 10.
Wow.
And it's to get to that point, right? There was so much work and learning that had to happen to make sure that the product really met a need, but also met users where they were. And I think that's really 2 things. And if you don't do both right with the acquisition, I think you can kind of go astray, which is one, you've got to make sure the product is valuable and impactful. And I think we had that. But what we spent a lot of time doing is we didn't just like get acquired and then immediately launch Pattern Builder like a month later. We took a step back for about 8 to 9 months, and we essentially worked really hard to say, how can we actually put this tool like into the NetDocuments platform, applying the right security, being workspace centric. There were all these nuances to how our users worked, where we didn't want to make them like click a tab and like log into another platform and then run their automations and then come back to NetDocuments. Like that didn't feel like the right way to do it. And so by taking that pause at the beginning and doing kind of the hard work at the beginning to natively build it into the system, I think it's allowed us to run a lot faster since then. So when something like AI and these foundational models come along, it was pretty trivial for us to be like, okay, boom, let's put that into the product. Let's roll that out across our customer base. And I think we were able to move at a speed that I think a lot of legacy companies, quote unquote, mature companies are not able to, because we had kind of done that work.
Yeah, I've seen it with a lot of tools, right? Like the CLM tools and the document repository, document management tools, just going out and acquiring any random AI company in the hopes of either for publicity, but then having real challenges, merging the technology. There's many stories about that. Well, what about personally for you, going from being an owner, boss to employee? How have you, how have you found that, and how have you adjusted? Maybe it's for the positive, work-life balance. I'm not sure, but what are the positives and what is some of the negatives of it?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned work-life balance. I remember when we got acquired, I'm gonna be like, finally, I'm gonna
sweet
sit back and clock out
Yeah.
every day at 5. But
It's all
it's
pina
actually
coladas, right?
Yeah, pina coladas. So I have pina coladas every day at 5. Yeah, that's what I do. In fact, I'm gonna cut this one short today. No. But what I actually found was, because the scale at which you're operating is so much bigger, the things you can do in a given day actually grows sort of exponentially. And so I work a lot harder at NetDocuments. It's my own problem. It's not my bosses. They actually are, telling me to slow down. But I work a lot harder at NetDocuments than I did at Afterpattern, where I thought I was working pretty hard too. But I really enjoy it. It's very energizing. In terms of, the transition from sort of like owner to employee, I think one of the things that's been pretty amazing about joining NetDocuments is they gave us the space to kind of be ourselves, and I'm given the space to be myself. So I'm not a traditional product manager, right? I didn't work at FANG companies and like learn kind of like the pragmatic framework or like things. I just kind of like built things and I learned how to design, and I do a lot of things. And so they let me, sometimes I wear a design hat, or sometimes I wear a product manager hat, or sometimes I get really, over my skis and I'm talking to the engineers about what they should be doing. And I think we're at a size where people can still be people and they're not just turned into kind of a cog in a machine. Like we're empowering people to take ownership and to really, adapt, sort of like adopt the best practices that work for them. And so I found that really gratifying, that I've been able to kind of like stay myself at NetDocuments. I think in terms of the like downsides, or not downsides, but just like things that are hard, when you're the boss, one thing I can say as a startup is you can move very, very fast in terms of decision making, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as you go, expand beyond kind of like a circle of 5 people or 6 people, then it becomes a lot about, and this is so important, it's really important work, but it's something that I wasn't as, and still to this day, I would say I'm like not as good at, which is like building, like really bringing everyone along with a vision and making everyone feel heard and making sure all viewpoints are accounted for, and then knowing the right time to kind of like bring that process together to make a decision and move forward. I came in and I was like, velocity of decision making is what matters to me. And I sort of brought that to NetDocuments. And I think a lot of people rightly around me, they're like, hey, there's these other things that we need to think about. And we need to think about scale. We need to think about, how do we deploy this in all these different regions? And I've learned over time that like, there's a lot of different stakeholders that need to be brought to bear when we're operating at the scale we operate at. And there's a lot of consensus building and knowledge sharing and knowledge resharing that has to happen. And so I've had to develop that skill set, which, as I think an owner of a small startup, you don't necessarily have to have as much. So
Yeah, it's quite an interesting interesting change, really, isn't it? It's not quite designed by committee, but you've got more people to convince that this is a good business idea, I guess. It's kind of a little bit similar to, I don't know how much you know about how Netflix managed, but they did a lot of if you wanted to make any change, anyone could propose a change to the business at Netflix, but they had to post a memo and be challenged in before kind of implementing it. It was quite, but obviously when you're operating at scale, like, there's lots of people with good and sometimes maybe not always so great opinions, but it's important to do that to get that consensus. Maybe changing it up a little bit, like if you were to give a TED talk about something that is not in your area of expertise, what would that TED talk be about, and why?
something not in my area of expertise.
Yeah.
Like, give me an example of what you mean. Like, what would you give a TED talk about? So I can make sure I.
Oh, you're flipping it on me.
Is it
Well,
like
I mean,
is it like a
obviously,
hobby that
as
I have, or is
as a
it?
professional, maybe obviously talk, I work in the legal space, but, I'm also super interested in oceans and why actually, the world wasn't called ocean, given 70% of, of the world is water, and all of us
Yeah.
came from there. So I'd probably
Got
do,
it. So,
something like something completely different.
okay. So something I'm basically an interest of mine that I have outside of work. Well, all I think about is work. So I would say so. Maybe a part of my startup journey that I kept out of the kind of is one of the things I spent a lot of time on for a long time was like pretending to be a writer. So I
Yeah.
actually spent a long time writing like sci-fi novels and writing sci-fi scripts.
Wow.
Probably from like as soon as I got to college. I basically didn't go to college. I just went to there's a Barnes and Noble in New Haven, and I would sit there and drink coffee and read books and pretend to write. And then
Yeah.
I did that through law school. So I had 7 years of pretending to write. I've always kind of done that since then. And I think while I never got to a point where I publish anything, I think I thought a lot about like what makes a good story and the components of that and storytelling. And so I actually have a freakish amount of insight into kind of like the bones of how a story is told. And one of the things I've thought about in terms of like a TED Talk is actually I feel like a lot of what I learned about, especially for sci-fi storytelling, you have to kind of come up with a world, and it has to make sense, and it has to
Yeah.
like also be elegant, and it also has to kind of set up good problems, juicy problems for the people in your world.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the parts of my brain I had to use for that are very similar to what it takes to build a company, in terms of how you kind of have to have this ever evolving model of the world
Yeah.
that you're updating and you're revising and that you're problem solving around. And sometimes things will come along where you realize, oh, that part of the world is totally wrong, and you have to like replace it to make it better. And,
Yeah.
and it felt exactly the same in terms of the part of my brain it was using. And so I think there's actually a lot that storytellers could learn from people who build companies, and people who build companies could learn from storytellers. So that would be my TED Talk.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Actually, I think that's a great answer. Yeah, I'd like to see that TED Talk, by
Yeah.
the way. What about when you think of the word successful? Who's the first person that comes to your mind, and why?
Oh man. Um, this is kind of a cop out, I guess, but I'd say one of my sisters. Okay, uh, she is um, she's a poet,
Wow.
and she is a painter, and she has wonderful kids who are like so level-headed and sensible and clearly have like the right values. And so she's done like a wonderful job kind of like raising them in her kind of like wooded area home that she has somewhere in Massachusetts. And I look at her life and I'm like, to me, that is actually the definition of success. It's someone who's like kind of perfectly balanced the priorities of their life. So she has like this really amazing, rich intellectual life. She's very healthy. She lives in, like in a place where she gets out in nature. And she has, I think that this is the number one thing, kids who are just like very, have really good values and are loving and have, I think, really good lives. And so I look at that. She's my older sister, so I'm allowed to look up to her, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's really well done. And I think sometimes there can be this this sense that what success looks like is just the check you get at the end of the rainbow. And I honestly, I sold my company. I know people who've sold their companies. I know people who've sold their companies for a lot more than I did mine. And what you realize very quickly is it's great for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then you go back to real life. And real life is just like, what are the things that you're doing that are, you think are positive, whether it's in your intellectual life or it's like with your family. And that's ultimately what success is to me, is striking that right balance and not getting caught up in that, whatever the outputs of that are going to be, just running that balance kind of like day-to-day life. So
Yeah. Speaking of that balance, you told me you're working even harder now, and you thought you were working really hard, and I know how hard entrepreneurs and founders work in terms of that. How do you personally keep that balance? Even in your family life and kind of, keeping the band together and keeping a really good connection with your wife and everything like that. How, what are the tips and tricks that you found that makes it work for you? Or, is it somewhere you think you can improve?
I mean, I think we can all improve at that sort of thing, but I think I'm pretty lucky in that I have a great family. I have 3 kids. I have a loving wife who also works a full-time job, and she's arguably busier than me.
Yeah.
She's a partner at a consulting firm. And I would say one of the things that's been good for us has been, we kind of like have very simple rules that we try to stick to. And one of the simple rules I think has been the best is we try to reserve weekends for family, right? So like during the week, we can kind of be dogs who just like work a lot, and maybe, we come down for like dinner and we do the bedtime ritual, but then it's back to work. And it can feel like a lot sometimes, but then you have that weekend where you basically don't work and you spend time with your family and you get out into the great parks that we have in New York. And I think that's actually been like, it's just a really simple principle, but just like have those days that are, happen every week where it's just time with your family or time as a person. And that allows you to kind of work hard when you need to work hard, and also like be present when you need to be present. So it's probably the like one trick I have. The other trick I have is don't try to be a sci-fi novelist. It frees up a lot of time if you're not trying to do that in your spare time. So that's the other thing.
Sounds like a lot less fun though. Like,
oh, I don't know. I've got other side projects, that I'm cooking up. So it's just a little bit easier than being a full-time writer. So
yeah. No, I feel you. What about because I speak to a lot of founders that are either in London, New York, in the Valley, etc. How important do you think, obviously, you almost, it sounds like, and nearly everyone that I've spoken to is probably at a pinnacle moment where they're thinking about returning home or something like that, or getting back to kind of, a smaller town. And actually, another point I would say is that nearly all of them that I've spoken to on this podcast, I think bar one in 20, have come from very small towns. So,
Okay.
which I think is pretty incredible. That hustle factor. I mean, first question, and I know we are running out of time a little bit, but first question is, how important do you think it is to be in a metropolis hub of business, in your career, either as an entrepreneur or where you are today? And secondly, how do you think being outside of or coming from outside of that has shaped you to be different from someone who is born and bred from one of those big hubs?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's like, I mean, I think that maybe this is specific to New York, but I feel like New York is all people who found New York. Like New Yorkers are people who found New York, right? And
Yeah,
I
it's
feel
true.
that way. And that, I've
Yeah.
been here on and off for about 17 years. And, I come back from, like a beach vacation or somewhere out in nature. I step out of the, and I see the grimy subway with the rats running along the street and the garbage heaped on the sidewalk. And I'm like, it feels so good to be home. I'm being a little facetious, but I actually I like the chaoticness of New York. I like the energy of New York. It has some downsides for sure, and I think that turns a lot of people off, but I've always been drawn to that, and I always feel relief when I come back home, and it truly is home for me. And I couldn't imagine myself being anywhere else. Um, I do think there is an aspect to, big cities like New York in that most of the people who, especially when you get into the professional world, most of the people who are operating at the highest levels of the professional world in those cities are people who came to the city. They had to choose, and there's something in the choosing and having to go somewhere and like carve out a new life that I think um, definitely selects for a certain type of person, not necessarily better or worse, but just a more action oriented type of person. And I will say from a founding a company standpoint, I know, and this is again sample size of one, so take it for what it's worth. But I know there are a lot of startups now that are going like remote and anybody can work anywhere. And I think that, once you're past like 20 people at a company, totally makes sense because you're essentially remote at that point. You're
Yeah.
on a different level or in a different office, so it might as well be where you want to be.
Yeah.
But man, oh man, in those first few years, if you can keep your, size pretty small, the kind of dynamism you can get from small teams is quite extraordinary. And I think that's something even at NetDocuments that we're pretty good about actually. We're aligned around like full stack teams. So like there's a designer and an engineer and a product lead who all work together on a small team, and they kind of like they operate as almost a small company within the company. And I think it gives us a lot of dynamism, and allows for us to, for example, when something like Gen AI comes around, be in market 6 months later, which I mean, really, there was very few companies at our scale who were able to do all the things you have to do to get something like that into market. We had to deploy in 5 different regions and all these things. So I know we've stumbled across, away from the metropolis question, but I do think like to kind of come back to it, I think being in a place with other people really, really matters, because it just allows for alignment a lot quicker. So
Yeah. What about last two questions? So what about heading to university, BA Scott? What advice would you give to him now? Looking back, what advice would you give to your younger self?
oh man, that's a tough one. I think as I've gotten older, I've realized I almost never regretted saying yes to things. Um, and I almost always regretted saying no in a way. It's like I think it depends on your personality type.
Yeah.
I can be pretty extroverted in a given conversation, but my kind of resting state is I like to kind of be internal. I like to read. I like to spend a lot of time on my own. And so I think just being more out in the world, I think is something that I've learned over time, even though there's a little bit more friction mentally for me to get out in the world is way better. And so I think that, knowing the kind of person you are and the things that make you uncomfortable and sort of leaning into some of those uncomfortable things, I think can make you more expansive as a person. So if you're an extrovert, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the advice is just stop going out, go indoors, read a book, listen to Bob Dylan, drink a beer, and just be in your own head. So
yeah, good answer. And final question, what would be your theme song?
What would be oh man, that is a really tough one. Oh, theme song. This is terrible. You've stumped me. I don't know if I have you know what? I'm going to be kind of lame. I don't know if it'd be my theme song. It's more like my favorite song. So I don't know.
Give it to us.
There's a band, Neutral Milk Hotel, and they have this like King of Carrot Flowers, nice, tidy, like 2-minute song. And I just love it. I think it's like kind of like the perfect song, and it's a little too short, which makes it even more perfect. And so that's I think would be I don't know if that'd be my theme song. It's kind of a very specific kind of song, so maybe not my theme song.
Could you just repeat the artist and the song again, please?
Yeah, Neutral Milk Hotel, and it's King of Carrot Flowers is the song.
King of Carrot Flowers, excellent. Well, Scott, we're out of time, but it's been such a great conversation. I knew it would be. The guys that pinned me down at Clock last year that said you must speak to Scott. He's amazing. I'm really grateful that they did so. And thanks for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And any final words of wisdom or anything you'd like to share with the audience?
I mean, I think no words of wisdom. I'm just a guy talking about, his very specific experience. So I would just say, I think everyone's kind of on their own journey. And I remember listening to a lot of like startup stuff about people's journeys. And I think over time you realize like it's all so individual and you just got to go with what you think is right. So don't listen to me. That's my wisdom.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. I really, really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it.